Cool. Let's start now, and we'll see like how as people come join in, they can move on from there. So before we start, I would like to acknowledge the Aboriginal people that are the traditional custodians of the land. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, both past, present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. Today's seminar is by Professor Bill Randolph from CFRC, City Futures. Bill needs no introduction in the group. He's one of the oldest members of CFRC and has served as the director of the center for nearly 15 years, from 2004 to 2020. And he has also served like in various senior management positions within UNSW, such as Associate Dean for Research from 2009 to 13. He has over 40 years of experience as a researcher on housing, urban policy issues in the academic, government and non-government private sectors. He's a fellow of Royal Academy of Social Sciences in Australia, a fellow of Planning Institute of Australia, and member of Australian Housing Institute. In City Futures, he undertakes research specializing in housing policy, housing markets, and affordability, urban renewal, metropolitan planning policy issues. So with that, like we're very happy to have Bill for the seminar, for his talk, and I'm looking forward to his talk. And I would like to hand over to Bill for today's talk. Over to you, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Bala, for that introduction there. You're making me feel really old now. So that's a great way to start. Okay, now I don't know whether, Bala, are you able to control the screen, or is the screen already showing the presentation?
It's showing the presentation.
Okay, all right, great. Well, look, thanks everybody for tuning in on this afternoon. It's very warm here in Sydney, so we should really be out enjoying it before it gets cold again, but never mind. Thank you very much for being here. What I'm going to do today is just do some, this is a project in progress, so it's, and literally the data, some of the data is hot off the press. I think Reg and Ryan were still processing this yesterday, very to get it ready for today. So there may be some rough bits. It's also just part of a project that we've been doing over the last nearly 3 years now, looking at the kind of development process for apartments in Sydney and trying to understand the relationship with the planning program. I'm sorry, the planning process, not the planning program. Of course, sorry, Simon. The planning process. Because we're interested in the way in which the two articulate together. I'll just, the credits here are myself, Simon Pinniger, Reg Wade and Ryan Harris at UNSW, Lawrence Troy, University of Sydney, and Alistair Sissons, who's now at University of Wollongong. All these people were once, or are still, associated with the City Futures Research Centre. Ryan Harris is just leaving today, actually. He's on his way to the Department of Planning for a proper job. So people come, people go, but Ryan, Reg and Alistair have actually done all the hard work. So I'll say that right up front. So what's it all about? 3-year IARC discovery called Developing the Compact City. 3 basic objectives we set out. What's been built across the city. Who are the developers? What are their business models? That's been more difficult to track down, but we are starting a whole series of interviews with developers right now to talk to them about the process and how they do it. And the third thing really is this articulation with the planning system. You know, how does it support, engage, or not the development process? What are the issues? What are the barriers? And what does the planning system actually do in the whole process of development? And 2 kind of guiding conceptual things going on here. One's the, obviously, for those of you who do housing and planning, a fairly well-known understanding of the sort of financialization of housing as an investment medium, which has really powered the housing boom over the last decade or so, and how that's crystallized into the phenomena of the apartment boom in Sydney in particular. And this role of the planning system is this sort of vital switching mechanism for value in the built environment. So the notion of planning as a value switching process, from turning a particular land use into a, to quote the economist, a higher and better use, and the value that particularly higher use, particularly at the value that creates in the development process, and how that underpins profitability. So that's the overall objective. So today is really a bit more about the data-y side of stuff, to be honest, partly because we're just in the middle of, well, just getting to the end of some big heavy-duty data crunching. And what we've been interested in a number of things here. One is the time it takes for an apartment scheme to go from, go to woe, from the initial purchase of land through to the final completion and the registration of the apartment block. And that's when an apartment block is finished, before the settlement on all the lots, it has to be registered as a strata scheme. And so that's basically the date we're taking as completion. We're also interested in the role that planning plays in that timeline. So, is it a significant role in terms of just the time it takes to get something through the planning system? So we've done a lot of work sort of timing, putting the times together on that, and basically the notion by which on which this is articulated is what role does the planning system play in the whole development process? Because we hear a lot about planning, we don't necessarily hear about the rest of the development process, which is just as important as we'll see in terms of time, very much more so. And that's critical for developers. For developers, time is everything. Timing is everything. The longer it takes to get a scheme going and out and sold, more costs are involved. So you'll hear developers all the time talking about risk and time, because that's such an important thing. So what we've done to do this, and I'll go through this in a little bit of detail, is we've put together a series of data sets from government agencies primarily, but also from CoreLogic, to basically tie together various bits of information on as many schemes across Sydney that have been developed in the last decade. We've called this rather grandiosely, well, I've called it, I don't know, nobody else has, the Sydney Integrated Apartment Data Set. We're also doing a fair amount of qualitative work, 40 to 50 in-depth interviews with a whole range of folks involved in the process, from planners, planning panels, the consultants who work very closely with both sides, and as I said, the developers. And we've done a lot of review of planning documentations. We've looked at some cases of the LGAs. And this has synergies with other research going on at the moment. Simon, Laura and Hazel's piece of work on collective sales is another ARC discovery, and the work that Chris Pettit is leading on Value Australia and the Australian Housing Data Analytics Platform, which is all about assembling data sets. Okay, so what is this scheme level data set? So we've basically based it around development approvals of between 2007 and 2017. Remember, this project's been going for 3 years, across Sydney. And we've assembled the data around those events. We've focused on 6 LGAs for more detailed case study work, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Those are the 6 to get a spread from across the value gradient, if you like, of Sydney, from high value to lower value in the suburb. And we've drawn, say, unit level data from a set of 4 data sets geocoded and linked at the address level. We've done a fair amount of modeling to develop a value uplift and profitability calculation, first for a subset of 30 schemes in detail to understand whether the modeling was working, and then we're going to try and roll it out more generally. And we've taken 6 cases, exemplars, forensic ones, where we forensically looked at the planning process, the whole planning timeline in those schemes. So we'll have a look at those in a minute. A bit more background. Really, what we've done is to put together 4 sets of data. That's the middle bullet point, if you like. Sales of land, which could be used as development sites. The determinations for planning permissions, including assessment times. sale of residential units after the things off the plan or after things got approval, or not necessarily actually, as we found out, and registration data. That's, as I said, building completions. We've linked these where we can. We've geocoded them. We've amalgamated them. Unmatched schemes, non-resi schemes, and schemes under 5 strata schemes under 5 units. We've excluded. Many of those will be townhouse developments. So we had 8,000 cases overall. We've whittled it down to under 2,000 now, just under 2,000. We're still cleaning, so it may drop a little further as we progress. And the project, as I say, will complete early next year, all being well. Okay, so let's just do a little bit of background here. You all know the story, I suspect. The unprecedented apartment boom over the last decade. Oh, here's a handy cup of tea just arrived. Thank you very much. I could do with that. And Sydney is no different. So it's the boom in Sydney has partly been houses, but mainly apartments, as we know. So rising to it's over 30, 35, 36,000 in that sort of peak period 3 or 4 years ago. And there's been a drift to, well, not a drift, but a rapid escalation in large schemes over that period. This is a long time series, but it shows you for New South Wales the shift here in the 30 years ago. It was all three-story walk-ups. Now they've dwindled to a very small proportion of the output. Very much more the higher height developments. So buildings have got bigger. We all know that, I guess. And there's more recently, this is a 10, 15-year time span. This looks at dwelling commencements and completions, the blue and the red line and the blue line. There's always a lag, obviously. Things have to start. It takes some years for them to complete. But and the yellow line shows that the price appreciation over that time. So have apartment prices driven this boom, or have they been sucked up as the boom continued? That's a question which I don't think we can certainly answer. But you can see there's a relationship between the two. Okay, so we've done our best to sort of look at the timeline stuff from official data as well, to make sure, in a sense, to make sure that whatever we come up with is actually, somewhere near what the official version of the truth is. So this has really been drawn from 2 sources. One is DPI, Department of Planning. Gosh, what's the I? In infrastructure and environment. Sorry guys. Local performance monitoring. This is data sets that have been released recently. Very interesting indeed, very useful. And this is the mean gross days for new multi-unit development approvals determined in, this is the latest data set I could get hold of, 2017 and 18. So very much at the end of our 10-year period. The red bars are 6 case study LGAs. So these are spread around the mean, just over 300 days altogether, which is about 0.8 of a year. The 6 case study LGAs is slightly quicker, actually, 0.6 of a year. Not entirely sure why that is, but that's just how it is. So basically, what this is telling us for Sydney as a whole, it takes about 0.8 of a year to get a scheme, a typical scheme, through the planning system. Now, ABS published data on the times from approvals to commencement on site and from commencement on site to completion. This is quite, again, a very useful set of data. The best we can do is New South Wales, but nevertheless, this chart shows that they've grown, the time taken from both approval to commencement on site and from commencement to completion has trended up over the last decade. Currently sits in total for those two periods put together about 10 quarters. These numbers are in quarters. 2.3 quarters for approval to commencement, and another 7.7 quarters from commencement to completion. So what we get picture there is it takes about 10 quarters to get a project off the ground once it's been approved. So putting those figures together gets a figure of 13.7 quarters or 3.4 years. So overall, an average development in Sydney will probably take you about 3.5 years from approval to completion. Okay. Now that means that the approval process takes up about a quarter, just over a quarter of the of that timeline altogether. But that excludes the pre-lodgement period. Now this is a very important period for developers and planners because a lot of work goes on in that period, obviously to prepare the submission for the lodgement. So we're very interested in that period as well. What's the lag between buying a piece of land, getting hold of a piece of land, and actually getting to the point where you submit? So what does the Sydney Integrated Department database show us? Well, we've done a lot of work trying to define this timeline using the geocoded unit level data and to establish the sequencing of various ways in which development proceeds. And as we found, it isn't quite so straightforward as we thought. And to do that in that way, to have a better understanding of where planning plays in this whole complex process of development of block flats. These are the data sets which we've managed to bring together. So the Value General's property sales data sets, land sales, the DPI development approval data set for lodgement and approvals of developments. We don't have any information on commencing development on site. That just does not seem to be available. But we do have the sales of strata units, which gives us a clue because the first sale, we can chart the first sale of units in each block, the date that the first sale, and that's usually off the plan for many of these blocks, as you guess. So we can chart that process. How long does it take from sale 1 to final sale, and also to scheme registration. And that's the last bit of data we have from land registry services. So those are the data sets we've cobbled together. This is what it kind of looks like on the ground. And on the left-hand side, the right-hand side are some of the problems that have been faced putting this together. And I think Alistair and Reg particularly have struggled with this over the last few years to sort of wrangle these various data sets in some form of sense. So this is Wooleye Creek, obviously, as many of you will immediately recognise. There's no significance in the colourings. They're just as it says, each side is a random colour. But these are the ones we've identified in this integrated data set, which have the majority of the key data attached to it. And there are a number of real issues around here. You can see here that some of the schemes have multiple land parcels that obviously get assembled over time. Sometimes the geocoding doesn't match, so you might have a DA with one code, geocoded location, and a strata registration with another one. They might be in adjacent lots, blocks of land, for example, or they might be, some 100 meters up the road, something like that. And as we can see, particularly in this example at the top, this is I think a Fraser's development up there. You can see that lot geometries are often very complex for the big schemes. The lines there are individual lots that we've had to kind of work out to bolt together to get that scheme into one sensible case, if you like. So that's been a lot of work and still going on to try and automate that and make that work well. Clearly, a lot of schemes don't have full data sets, and there's one in the middle here, which is obviously an apartment scheme which we don't have a full data set on, so it's left out. Others, there's one over the road, which is obviously just coming out of the ground, so it has no registration data for that. And others, I think this one here, Movement 101, just just above the middle, clearly was done before, or developed and DA before our time period, we think. So there's a lot of difficulty with the data. It's taken a lot of time to wrangle it into a reasonably good shape. And some of the data just, we don't know whether it's there or not, the unknown unknowns, to coin the immortal phrase. So it's not been easy. So what did we come up with? Well, this is what we came up with, the average time days it took over that 10-year period, and that we'll go into this in a minute, took about 232 days to get the average apartment scheme through the development process, but it took 1,735 days on average to get the scheme from start to finish, usually from land acquisition through to registration. So that's a long time. That's nearly, as we say, 4.75 years, nearly 5 years. Within that framework, within that context, the DA process, development approval process, took about 13% of the timeline. So how long does it take to build a block of flats? Well, that's an answer. And as you see, it varies. Some of the data is really interesting to sort of look into this stuff. We've done some work on this before, but this gives you an idea of the lag between approval time and completion time out of the data. So this is looking at all schemes that were completed by 2020, which is why there's a big drop off there. And you can see that there's kind of again, there's approximately a 3-year lag at the beginning of our data set, stretched out to 4 as we've gone through the decade. And there's a good reason for that, as you see. And this is one of the good reasons. Schemes have just got bigger. They got more complex. Average scheme sizes has increased significantly over that time. And well, we've all seen that around us, so that's not surprising. But the data, at least, are showing us that, which is always comforting as a researcher. So what are we doing? This is the kind of nitty-gritty of the data set itself. So we identified 5 key dates, and from that we deduced 4 key stages of the development sequence. Final land sale before development was our key starting off point, and you'll understand that quite often there's several land sales involved, particularly when sites are being amalgamated. There may even be land sales after development's been approved, and we'll see that is in fact the case. The lodgement, the approval of DA, sale of the first strata unit from that scheme, and the registration. So LS, Lodge, App, SS, and SR are the kind of acronyms for that. And the stages are pretty straightforward. As we foreseen it or thought about it, that there are 4 key stages. There's a pre-lodgement stage from land purchase to proposal. There's the development approval stage, that's the planning bit. There's the finance construction phase, which you could possibly say is from approval to the first unit sale. That's our approximation of that. In other words, getting the scheme up and running, getting finance in place, getting the marketing sorted, and so on. Most of these will be sold off the plan before the development is finalised, of course. And then there's the sales phase, which is the first strata sale to strata completion. That's the registration date. So if that's the case, what do we find? Well, we actually found a lot of variety. This is the first 10. I think there were about 20 variations of this sequencing that the data showed us. And this is just the first 10, which seem to be more interesting of the ones, and clearly the more large ones. Now we think this will slim down as we clean the data further and we get rid of some of the odds and sods, and we understand what's going on. But the most typical one was this one here. Obviously, this is the kind of traditional idea. You buy a bit of land, you develop you get your planning approval in place, you get your approval, you start selling the scheme, and you move through the final completion registration. And that's the largest group by far of our sample. So all good there. But then the second one is this one here, the second one is this one here. He says, trying to make it do the. If I can go backwards, shouldn't be too hard with me. Here we go, going backwards. So this is where we didn't have a first land sale or a sale before the development was the planning approval was lodged. Okay, now it could well be the land sale was before our time period, so we didn't have that. Or it could be because the landowner had held the land for a long time, or it could be that there wasn't a sale. It could be that there was a sort of a contract between the developer and the landowner that the sale would go ahead once the development had been approved. So that's another variation. Well, this is the second most common one, where you have a lodgement and an approval, and then after the approval, there's a sale, and then it proceeds to marketing and then the scheme completion at the end. So just under half the original type 1 were type 2s. So that was a pretty common occurrence. Type 3, again, a variation on a theme. No previous land sale recorded that we found. Then a land sale between lodgement and approval, and then proceed through to completion. Number 4, oops, I've gone the wrong way. Number 4 is a land sale, lodgement, and then sales start before the approval comes through, which may or may not be appropriate. I don't know about that, but that's what we found. There were 126 of those schemes. That's what showed up in the database. And then finally, this one, number 6, Reg thought this was more interesting than number 5, actually. This is a land sale, lodgement approval, and then registration, and then sales start after the scheme's registered. So this is kind of like, in a sense, a traditional way of doing building. You build your house and then you try and sell it. You build your block of flats and then you try and sell it. So there are 81 of those. So these were variations. Some schemes were clearly being flipped with a DA in place and then sold on to the eventual developer. I think we'll be having a look at those in a little bit more detail. And as the third bullet point, we're going to try and amalgamate as many categories as we can, explore the sequencing, and trying to iron out some of those unknowns that I talked about earlier. So this sort of initial analysis did really indicate the complexity of the staging and sequencing of the development process. So getting back to our timelines again, what did we find when we looked at those different sequences? Well, we only looked at in detail the first 2, the type 1, the type 2, type 1 being the kind of typical, if you want to call it that, from a land sale through to registration. And that came out at about 5.6 years. That's the sort of times for those bits of the process. Always the grey bit's quite interesting. What is going on there? Clearly, it's putting the site together and getting the finance in place. Maybe starting on site and getting the first development process going. Second one, development sequence type 2. This is the one which we didn't have an initial land sale, but again, quite an extended bit between approval and the first sale of the unit. This green bit, determination to land. To land sale. This is land sale after approval. So almost a year on average for these schemes to go from approval to land sale to the next person who then presumably goes on and develops the scheme. So that was what's going on there. We need to sort of explore that, and we're talking to our developer friends hopefully to do that. But what was kind of comforting with lodgement to completion data, our data was 3.3 for type 1, DPI ABS data was 3.4. I think it was this second type which was kind of more interesting in a way, because it's obviously taking longer with this subsequent sale to determination taking place. And just to go through, we started to break these down by various characteristics. First one, like development size. Well, obviously, the bigger the scheme, not illogically, the longer it takes to get the thing off and up the ground and sold. But what's interesting there, I suspect, is that it's the pre-lodgement phase, which they're more complex for bigger schemes, obviously, and the marketing periods stretch out longer than for smaller schemes. The planning bit in the middle varies. It does grow. It gets significantly bigger for larger schemes, but not massively so. And the kind of grey bit in the middle actually gets smaller and scheme size gets larger. So clearly the larger schemes are keen to get the marketing into place first. This is the date of registration. In other words, what year the scheme was finalized, was completed. And you can see that that's stretched out significantly as time has gone on over that decade or so. So that schemes completed in 2019 took significantly longer than they did in the early part of the decade, and almost doubled, in fact, between for T1 schemes between 2013 and the end of the decade, our decade, and since 2000 T2 schemes. So yes, the process has got longer as time has proceeded. Of course, schemes are getting larger. Of course, that's possibly one of the big reasons. This is another way of looking at it. This is schemes plotted by the date of approval. In other words, when the scheme was approved and ready to go. And it does seem that the GFC had a bit of an impact here. If you look at the left-hand side, the grey bar is extended for 2009, 2010. So schemes that were approved in those two critical years took a long time to get going. I think that's, and of course on the right-hand side shows pretty much the same thing. So there was clearly an impact of the GFC during those periods on just getting schemes going. And then finally by value, and this is kind of an interesting one, appears to be telling us, look at the left hand, the typical T1s, longest time scales for schemes in the middle range, the sort of medium priced, kind of typical two-bed investor grade product, I think was the term that has been used. Less so for quicker for the premium products, maybe the smaller blocks to premium buyers, downsizers, people like that, who perhaps cashed up, smaller marketing requirements, and perhaps a smaller, shorter time periods for the cheaper blocks. Remember this. One word of caution here: these figures are not adjusted for over time for CPI, so we're going to do that and see what the figures come out. As I say, this is hot. These figures are hot, first cuts in some ways. So it could be that it's just an impact of time. Okay, so that's kind of broad and answer where we've got to with these big data sets to try and wrangle the timelines. So then we've had a look at before we get onto the sixth one. We've had a look at 30 schemes in some considerable detail. These are we picked 5 schemes of 6 for the 6 LGAs, so 5 schemes for City of Sydney, Ku-ring-gai, Ryde, Canterbury Bankstown, Parramatta, and Penrith, and we looked at 30 across those areas to try and get a much deeper understanding of the processes going on, the costs, the planning process behind them, the locations, the sales rates, and so on. And we've been able to do a fairly sophisticated modelling of the uplift that we think those departments have generated. Now we're not going to look at those in this presentation. We're still working on that. That'll be maybe the next one, early next year, if I get my arm twisted to do another, or perhaps one of the other guys can do it instead. So we've got a lot of work going on right now looking at this sort of value switching, which will be revealed when we've finished it. But Reg has done an amazing job on that in developing a very sophisticated feasibility model, drawing on a whole range of information, a lot of it from places like CoreLogic, and also the development approval data. So things like construction costs that mentioned in development data, but also our own estimation of those costs. Well, what we've done to sort of bring these things to life is to look at 6. And Ryan, who is just about to leave us, unfortunately, has done a forensic look at 6 case studies. Have a quick look at what they are. And these are they. They're one in each of our local authorities. They're not picked for a particular reason other than to give us a spread from the small ones like Onyx, so the bottom left-hand corner there in Penrith, relatively small scheme, to much larger and more complex developments like Promenade in Morton Street in Parramatta, the one in the middle bottom, and with sort of scaling up in between. So these, and you know, there's some high-cost schemes or sort of high-value schemes, as well as some lower-value schemes as well. So they're not meant to represent anything in particular other than a spread of different developments and types. So we're doing kind of the works on these as best we can, looking at their costs, as well as the planning process that went on to get these out of the ground. And I'll just go through three summaries, and these are charts that Ryan has put together. So here's Sienna by Dream Build in Ku-ring-gai. And this is what we've been trying to do to build up that planning process, a timeline. So what did Dream Build have to do to get this block developed over the period that it did? So we've been able to map out a whole range of things, including development application, the land sales for these blocks, the first pre-sale of property of units, demolition, completion dates, registration and settlements on the final sales. So this is a kind of fairly typical, relatively high-end block up in Ku-ring-gai, which was, I think, was redeveloped on two blocks of land which were amalgamated and settled on the same day, I think, when the development approval had been submitted. So that's one timeline. Next one, sort of going up the scale in slightly more complexity, is Canterbury Hub by J Group down on the banks of the river down at Canterbury. Again, more complex sites. As you can see, there's more complexity with this one. This variety of site acquisition purchases. So this was built out over, I can't quite remember, sort of 4 or 5 sites, site 1, site 2. Yeah, there was a whole series of smaller sites underneath this one. Some were, you know, old rundown industrial, rundown commercial. Perhaps there was a house or two as well. So the developer had to put these sites together and then put submissions. And you can see on the right-hand side of the chart there, the various toings and froings that the developer had to go through the planning system to get the final product out of the ground and completed. So there was toing and froing on the contributions that were being required by the local council. Developer got some of those reduced. DAs had to go in for several schemes separately because they hadn't got their acquisitions quite stacked up in the right way. There were some additional units that were managed to be negotiated before the end. So that's a more complex process. And then finally, this one here, Promenade, Starry Land in Parramatta. This was much more of an industrial site, commercial site, turned in, rezoned. There's a rezoning into a residential development on the banks of the Parramatta River, as you can see. So 3 stages, much more complex, 10 buildings, 4 to 12 stories, 778 units. And again, considering the size of the scheme, actually not that complex a process we came out in the end. Ryan has actually simplified these charts. I have to say, the original ones are like, you know, like spaghetti. He's done a great job at making it user-friendly. In other words, something I could probably understand. But you can see there's a whole range of different. Each scheme is basically its own project, and each scheme, the developer has to basically negotiate each scheme on its own, on merits through the system. So I guess what this is telling us really, along with that, the staging, the variety of staging and sequencing, tells us really the story of the complexity of the development process. one tells that these particularly, as we've unearthed them, each one of these examples has got a kind of 20 to 30 page document attached to this, which details what went on in terms of the planning process. The complexity of the planning process for some schemes, not all, some of them are pretty straightforward. So there's a variety of processes going on here. So just to sort of end on some points, some summaries about how long does it take us to build a block of flats. Well, it tells us the planning determination process for across our schemes, and that's from 10 years worth of schemes, nearly 2,000, was about 11% for the typical sort of schemes to come through. For type 2 schemes, it's more difficult or complicated one where there's a land sale after determination for whatever reason, a little bit longer, 15%. Fairly obviously, delivery times increase with scheme size and complexity, and we've seen that happening in Sydney over the last decade or so. And this has been one of the real drivers for why maybe the planning process has taken a lot longer, because there's a lot to look at in those big schemes. Again, in terms of what the planning assessment process takes in terms of its time, it's about 12% on average of the smallest schemes, but 9% for the largest schemes. So, even if you chipped away reasonably significantly at that assessment time, it may not make a huge amount of difference to the total scheme times, and therefore the total exposure to risk that the developer has to develop and deliver the scheme. Sorry about the spelling. I did say it was hot off the press. This. I'll try and translate into reasonable English. Variations in pre-lodgement and post-initial sales periods accounted for most of the variation in development timelines, and these appear to be getting longer. So it takes longer to get a scheme up to submission, lodgement, and longer to get them out of the ground and sold. Now, of course, we've had a boom has been replaced by a bust in the last couple of years, and that certainly must have had an impact on the sellout of these schemes. More analysis will be needed to explore the sequencing. We'll be hitting into that, but I think it's also the other kind of takeout for the data data savvy people amongst us. This has really demonstrated what value for research and potentially policymakers at integrating this detailed unit level, address level data for planning research. This has really kind of opened up a whole new vista of research. If we can get the data right and it's clean and all the rest of it, to start to string together these data sets which actually tell us the stories behind what's going on in the built environment. I think it's taken us quite a long time. It's taken us basically 2 years to get this stuff together, and we think it offers some real opportunities for researchers, and that's where the Value Australia project is heading, and this the Australian Housing Data Analytics platform that Chris is leading to try and do that across Australia to get a range of integrated data sets, which we hope will be of this sort of disaggregation, so that we can actually do really detailed and forensic level research on the built environment. Could be a bit of a breakthrough, but that's hopefully where we'll be heading. Okay, look, I think I'll end there before my tea goes cold, actually. So I'll be very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'll open the floor for questions. So if you don't have audio, please type the question in so that I can read it out for the recording. We have the first question from Hazer.
Hi, Bill.
Hello.
Just wanted to see if I understood correctly. The data that you show us, does that also show us that any increase in the time frame for completing these types of developments in recent years is explained mostly through an increase in the size of the developments and other delays other than planning delays? Is that what you were showing?
It does. I mean, clearly the data does show that the planning process has extended, but for the average scheme, it doesn't seem to be the most important reason why schemes are taking longer. I suspect it's size. I also suspect in the last couple of years it will, of course, be the bust, which has made the kind of completion times longer for selling, and also may well have deferred schemes a little. People have gone slow. That's difficult for me to say. I hope there's some experts from the development side on who can elucidate that, and our discussions with developers over the next couple of months will hopefully explore that as well. But yeah, I think it'd be reasonable to say that as schemes get bigger and more complex, the planning process gets more complex as well. But it also means the whole thing stretches out.
Great, thanks.
I hope that's the case anyway. I'm sure there may be others that will gainsay me. Hopefully they will.
So we have Hoon. Yep.
Hi, Bill. Very interesting research. We actually doing sort of housing property valuation project. So I just wonder, there is a different stage of development, DA actually applications and actual buildings and completion and strata completion. What do you see that the price is actually affect different stages across different stages? For example, when they first announce there might be have a new project going on, then it start, those property prices might be moving, but once they complete, it's obviously very clear it's actually done, no risk, then prices might be even higher. So I just sort of wonder what your experience. And normally in Australian housing market, when they actually announce or DA approved, then it start picking up, or they until completion. I think different impact across different stage of development, I guess.
Yeah, look, this is a really interesting question. I can't answer your question. I'll quickly say that. But clearly, there's part of the development skill in development, if you put it that way, is to get your GA through and to on a rising market, because that will reduce your exposure and your risk as you go forward. So if you're on a rising market, then clearly as prices are rising, as that chart showed, it reduces the chances of the scheme, cost overrunning the scheme. It gives you a much better buffer for success and profitability. So I think that's one of the questions we'll be talking to our developers when we get to talk to them about. How does that work? Do you do that? I will suggest you talk to Rupa Ganguly, who's doing a PhD with Howell Porson and myself on the marketing process of apartments. She spoke a couple of weeks ago, I think. She's got a very interesting take on that. She's talked to the marketeers and the developers on that very thing, the way in which prices are managed through the sales process, maybe a little lower to begin with, and then they rise as the scheme takes off and sales start to rise. Of course, you hit a bust like we've done in the last few years, and all bets are off, So that does change the dynamic, of course, significantly. But I think it's a really interesting. So it's kind of the microeconomics of the development process. It's not just you build a block of flats and you sell them. There's a whole range of stuff that goes on in that. There's a complex and as we said, everybody knows a risky business. But it's a really interesting question.
Some vacant land sale, then they actually have a DA actually approval attached to the vacant land. It's much expensive than just vacant land.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. I mean that's something we'll be looking at, the notion that you get a DA and then you flip the land to another person who then goes on to develop. Of course, that's a way of which that value switching process, that's a kind of almost a transparent value switching process, because you actually don't have to do very much other than get your DA through to make you money. So that will be interesting to talk to folks about that. But that clearly goes on. I think we'll be trying to identify some schemes that have clearly gone through that process in our data set. Interesting.
Bill, I might just add to that answer. Hi everybody, it's Reg here from City Futures. So Hoon, you also asked about how the sale price of apartments would change sort of pre or after DAs or after completion as well. So we are able to do that analysis. We just haven't gotten up to it yet. So we have the individual sales records for each unit being sold in the development, and so that's something that we might try and look at in the rest of the project. So we'll let you know.
Yes, there's no end to the excitement and fun you can do once you've got the data set up to roll. I mean, we also just by the by, we've linked in rental bond data to these data as well. So we are able to determine sort of the proportion of units that are held by non-residents, presumably landlords and rental levels. So this is a very interesting, and from those, of course, you've got a very interesting financial analysis that can flow out of that.
Cool. Thanks very much, Hoon. We had a question from Rupa, I think.
Oh, there she is.
Hi there. I'll just add to Reg and Bill's comments, really. There's different pricing strategies used for land as opposed to off-the-plan sales of individual apartments. So as Hoon and Reg and Bill have alluded to, sites with a development approval generally command a higher price. So back in the boom days, and you know, commercial real estate agencies like JLL and Knight Frank have produced research reports, which I can send to you, Hoon, which talk about the development market being hot. And in those, I suppose, in that market context, that's when DA approved sites particularly command a high price. Yeah, and developers who originally bought a site and are willing to take on the planning risk in a rising cycle, take advantage of that market context to price it lucratively. And it's a practice that's encouraged by real estate agents that sell the land, those sites on behalf of developers as well. So yeah, just adding to those comments.
Yeah, so there's, I mean, those sort of yellow bars on the charts, each one of those contains a multitude of complexity in themselves. You know, the pre-lodgement bit, even the development assessment process, of course, everyone knows the complexity there, and then the post, you know, the post assessment period and marketing. Very sophisticated and complex processes go on there. So, you know, this is slowly, I mean, with Rupa's work and others, starting to unpack that complexity.
Cool. I think we have like 5 minutes left for one more question, if anybody has one. Yeah, over to you, Chaylin.
Yeah, thanks, Para, and thanks, Bill. Nice presentation. Just wondering whether have you come across any scheme which, you know, there's a sunset cost. They are off the plan when the market doing well. After the completion, they deliberately wait for it and then resell it with a higher price to another new buyer. Have you come across?
No, we haven't. No, we're not looking at that, to be perfectly honest.
Yep.
It's. I presume they do exist, so people wouldn't talk about them. But no, we're not really looking at that. I think we're just that will require a much more complex and detailed search through the through data than we were able to do here. No, I mean, I think we're just trying to basically get to grips with understanding the development process and you know, again, you know, what role does planning play in turning that process on or off, as the case may be. So yeah, no, we've not come across anything like that. I don't think. Reg might jump in, or Ryan might jump in if he's online to say differently. But no, we're not going down that sort of route, I don't think.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Jalen. Cool. I think we are doing very well for time, and if there are no further questions, we can call the seminar to the end. And thanks everyone for coming. And I think we have like one of the highest attendances today. We hit the record of 60, which was like the last highest number of attendance we had.
It's very quiet out there. There's a bit of a worry.
I think that's like online, I guess. So
Okay.
hopefully we are going into stage like 2 of Back to Campus from December the 1st. And so we have like 3 more talks planned. The next one is going to be on 12th November by Dr. Ed Bensing. And he's going to talk about Indigenous people's rights and treaty developments in Australia. So it would be about why land and land use should be front and center in any treaty negotiations. So that would be in 2 weeks. And then we have like a couple of more talks for this term. So hopefully by end of the series, we'd be like getting back to campus and like doing the hybrid stuff again, I hope. And yeah, so thank you very much, everyone, and hope to see you in the next talk in 2 weeks. Thanks very much, Bill, for the exciting talk.
Thanks, Bowen. Thanks, everybody. Have a very lovely weekend.
Thanks, Bill.